All right, so for this next module, we're going to do a little Revit crash course. So this is Autodesk Revit 2024 that we're going to work through today. The workflow we're going to use is we're going to use our previous design in Rhino. And essentially we're going to use this as a guide, and we're going to go ahead and transcribe that work in Revit. So the premise here is you'll have done some of your design work in Rhino, and you're looking just to use this to create a sheet set and really to document your design. So the very first thing you'll have to do is export a drawing specifically from Rhino. So what I would recommend here is I'm just going to turn my contours off, and this model may look slightly different to you compared to maybe how it looked in the past. That's just because what we've done here is we've split out the streets from the mesh. We have some context stuff. And you'll notice we also have this additional area here that we've called site topo. And what that represents, the idea here is that maybe within the larger gasworks site, there's a kind of limit of work. And this will actually be the area where we may want to do some more design documentation and even splitting of the mesh. And we'll do that in Revit just to showcase some of the topo applications. And so from here, what I would recommend, once you have your model good to go and you have some additional subdivided meshes, most specifically a distinction between your, let's say, context and site boundary or limit of work, what you're going to want to do is highlight all of the information you have here. You go File, Export Selected, and we're going to want to go ahead and export this as a DWG. We can call this LARC 441 line work. We'll hit OK. And default works great here for us, so we'll hit OK. So you'll see that's been successfully saved into our A4 folder, and we'll hop over into Revit. So as I mentioned, Revit is made by Autodesk. This is a building information modeling software. What we're going to go ahead and do is go work from a new file, specifically the Imperial Multidiscipline, totally fine. You'll notice in this we have two options. We're not going to be working in metric since we're working out of the United States at the moment. Hit OK. Okay, so I'll talk you through a lot of the kind of layout of the drawing interface and things like that. I'm hitting down on the scroll wheel right now to pan, scroll wheel in and out to zoom in and out. And so a couple things just right off the bat that I would sort of bring to your attention. If you don't have your properties and you don't have your project browser, so if for whatever reason your interface looks like this, just know that you can right click, browser, project browser, right click, properties. These are two sort of ribbons on the side that you'll need certainly to operate the Revit interface. And the other thing I want to draw your attention to is the views. So you'll notice there's one tab right now. This is our Project 1 Floor Plan L1 Architectural. You can see that correlates to here. It's the one that's slightly more bolded. So that's what we're drawing in right now. I could just as well double click my L2 and you'll see another tab opens up. In landscape architecture, we're mostly going to be working from this, the site plan. So I'm going to double click there, and I'm actually going to go ahead and X out of these two previous ones. I'm not as concerned with my architectural floor plans. To that end, there's a number of different things we can do here in terms of our elevation views. So if you want to have a west view, you can double click on that. You can see there's an additional view. So there's a couple different views we can start to set up, 3D views. So what I actually want to do before I start to set up these views, which they're essentially like viewports the same way you would have in Rhino, they just open up here as tabs along the top. But the issue I'm seeing right away is we have far too much information for the purposes of this demo. There's a full construction sheet set here already laid out for us, from architectural floor plans through to plumbing and mechanical. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete these. I wonder if we can do a bunch at once. Yes, that's great. So all this we don't want. So go ahead and delete all that. I would recommend, certainly for the purposes of this demo, it's going to be helpful. You'll notice I deleted everything except for our sheet site plan. If I double click that, you can see now a new tab has opened up. This would be the equivalent of, say, in Autodesk, AutoCAD, the kind of like layout tab along the bottom. So just imagine this being along the bottom. Very, very similar look and feel. For this module, what you're going to do is create one sheet set. So this is totally fine, but I would go ahead and change the naming of the actual sheet. So you could do that and by right clicking and rename. And this is sort of up to you, but we just have one page, so it could be one. And it's not really our site plan necessarily. This project could be just sheet or design sheet. So there, design sheet 1. Project name, you can just double click on this and change the name. So in this case, Gasworks Park. Client name, could do anything here. This the city of Seattle. I think you get the point. But go ahead and just update all of these other things. You're the consultant, so have some fun with that. You could also swap out the logo for your own. But in any case, a lot of that initial setup there was really for us to simplify a little bit what we're looking at here on the side for the project browser, since we're not working with a bunch of interdisciplinary teams here. So this could get very overwhelming, when in reality right now, we could actually keep going and delete even more. So structural, it seems to me, unfortunately, I can't right click and delete here. That's a shame, because I'm sure I can delete here. So this is just a little bit of an oversight on the developer's interface sort of thinking, but we're looking to just delete these things out. So just bear with me here, or scroll forward if you kind of get the point and don't want to watch me do this. It's just going to help us have a cleaner interface for starting to learn the software. And so you can see, I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this cover view as well. These are our working plans, architectural plans. So you may notice this distinction between working plan and architectural plan. This is going to become more obvious a little bit later, but these views, as you update them, the way they're represented continues to change. So in your sheet set, for instance, as you work between this tab and change your views, they'll update in real time. So you do want a distinction between, what you're working in terms of like your site plan versus the kind of architectural one. And I think that'll become a little bit more obvious as I kind of actually work through this interface. We have our site. The other thing you may realize right away that's slightly confusing, at least potentially, is there's no 3D view. So just know to get your 3D view, you're going to click here, right up here. So this is just a sort of ribbon of some commands that Revit has deemed most commonly used. Default 3D view. And you'll see that now appears here in your 3D views. So the name correlating to here. So that might be helpful for you as well, just in that you may be wondering how to get into your 3D interface. So we have our site, we have our 3D view, we have potentially an architectural section, right? Something, or not a section, an elevation. And I'll go ahead and just have the sheet sort of at the end. So we have a site plan we can work through, 3D view, an elevation, and we'll also learn how to do a section cut in this, but we'll save that for a little bit later. So there we go. Now we have the interface all set up for ourselves. I'd recommend working from the site plan at the start. You may notice there's this kind of somewhat strange looking box. What that is a kind of extents view. So you can see there's a crop view here and a crop region visible. So if you turn those off, it may look a little bit more normal to you. I'm just going to leave those there, and just know that if you do want to crop stuff, we'll circle back to this when we're making our sheet set, but if you do want to start to crop things, just know that that's how you have that appear, and you can kind of push and pull on these. And this will make more sense once we have work actually in the drawing interface. So hopefully this is somewhat clear, just as a kind of getting used to our full interface. What I would recommend at this point is we'll get started with importing our work. So the first step is to import CAD. And we're going to go ahead and pull our file from A4. And we'll open that. All right, so this is how that work is starting to appear within our 3D space. If I go over to site now, you'll start to get a sense of the scale. And for instance, if I did have these crops on, you may run into something like this, right? Where you've imported your work and you're not understanding why you can't see more of your work. So you could click on this kind of extents box and drag to reveal your work. So this would be one way to do it. The other option is just to turn it off. And so this is more just the full extents. The other thing that you can start to play around with is these views, or the visual styles. So if I click on this, you can go to something like shaded, which is maybe a little bit more traditional to what you're used to. Similarly, what you'll see now is it doesn't change view to view. This view setting is not going to translate over. So we do have to update it here as well. And we would just do that in the exact same way. Shaded, there we go. Now I don't want these sort of guide boxes, so I'm going to go ahead and just highlight those and hit these little sunglasses and say hide category. And you'll see you get this kind of temporary hide / isolate view. That's totally fine for us. That's just letting us know we have something hidden while we're drawing. So at this point, we have our imported sort of geometry here. You can see it really acts as an imported symbol. What we're going to do from here is go to our massing and site, topo solid, and we want to create from import. Now you'll see this as I've clicked, the impulse may be to want to start to work with this, but you can't select anything. That's because we need to click one more button. We need to click here, create from CAD. Once we've clicked on that, there's no indication really to us anywhere that we have clicked this button, unfortunately, but just know it is clicked. There's a little bit of a prompt down here for us that says select a 3D import symbol to create a topo solid. And so this is our 3D import symbol. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. From here, you may sort of start to notice these layers. These are our layers from Rhino. And so the only one that maybe we don't want to create a topography from is our buildings, right? We don't want that to be part of the topo. Now our sidewalk, which is indicated here in red, our simplified mesh in green, our site topo in this kind of burgundy brown, and so on. We do want all these streets in kind of yellowy gold. So we'll hit OK. So you'll see one thing that is very common in Revit is tons of warnings and errors that don't really matter that much. So these you can just kind of ignore as you work through. So what you'll see here now is we have this new topo solid, and we do still have our overall, let me just orbit around a little bit. We still do have our imported symbol. The way I'm orbiting, by the way, you're holding shift and your control wheel down. So that's how you're actually orbiting around in 3D space. You could also just click on this, which is the same kind of toggle thing as for, say, the 3D interface for even AutoCAD. I would say shift and control wheel does work quite a bit nicer for us. So from here, I want to just quickly hide this for us. Now there's a couple ways that we can hide this. We can go ahead and hide it using the temporary hide isolate function that I have been using, or we could go ahead and hit VG for visual graphics. And specifically here, we're looking for our imported categories here along the top. There we go. So same kind of thing here. You could actually go ahead and turn off this LARC 441 and hit OK. And you'll see that hides it out, right? So this is the new topography that we've made, our topo solid. That is a 16-inch grassland. So that's the profile of this. It's 16 inches in depth. So the next thing we may want to do is actually go back to our visual graphics. That was just to kind of show you what we did in terms of creating a new topography from our mesh. But here, let me go ahead and click here. I'll hit OK, just to bring that back for us, because we do want to use this as a reference. Specifically, we want to use it as a reference to cut out a site area here. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to select your topo solid. So just make sure that when you do have that selected, you'll see there's a lot of really great commands here in terms of modify sub-elements, add points, even subdivide, as well as things like split element. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is showcase split element as a first option here for us. The element I want to split, you have to select that. And so I've selected that. And you'll see now we're in this kind of command. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my top view and just orbit this around, because I actually want to use my DWG, my line work, or my sort of reference mesh, whatever we want to call it, our reference file. to guide this parameter, this distance here. So you can do this a bunch of different ways. You could select a rectangle. You could also pick lines if you've imported lines. Now I know I didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to choose this line command here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and it will snap to these endpoints. So go ahead, and in this case, you're really just drafting the same way you would in CAD. Go down here, snap to that instance. And to here. So to get out of this, once you've drawn your box, whatever shape it may be, mine happens to be a rectangle, but just know you can draw additional shapes, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But hit escape to get out of that command, and you can finish edit mode here. Okay, so again, like I mentioned, there's generally seemingly always warnings and things like that. Totally fine. We're going to go ahead and go back to our modify just to evaluate the work that we've been doing. I'm going to go ahead and use my visual graphics and just turn off this reference file that we've been using, just to show you that now we've cut out this area, right? Our site boundaries. So really sort of from a conceptual standpoint, if you will, we have a context, in this case, a topo solid that is a grassland with 16 inches of depth. And we have this additional file, which has the same parameters at the moment, but we could conceivably start to change this. We could switch this to concrete pad, or from here, if you need to select that again, it's a little bit tricky to select it at times. Just know you can grab it from here. We could switch this, and it could be made of wood planks. That looks like. You'll notice if I switch this view to realistic, you do start to get like these tiles for wood planks. So that's that there. So the idea here is that you could sort of conceivably render this out, and it's an all-in-one suite. I'm going to go back to shaded. And so as you work through this, the next step that you may want to do is you may want to go ahead and select this additional area. I'm going to go ahead and move this back to my grassland. And from here, we may actually want to subdivide the region. And this would be if you wanted to add, say, a pathway into this, something like that. You go ahead and click subdivide. I'll go to my top view and just scroll into my site extents here, which you can start to see. So let's say I have a path that I'm looking to create as it moves through just across this landscape. Maybe it's just zigzagging right through the whole thing. I'll go to there. And let me close out of it there, just so I can show some other commands. So this is my, let's just say my center line for this. What you could do here is you could start to offset your work. So you could do offset, and you'll see the offset here is 1 foot. Now, if we want to make, say, a 3-foot path, or a 6-foot path, we could do 3 feet here. And just start to offset this on either side. So that would be one kind of way to start to work through this. We'll hit escape. Now you could do extend or trim corners to connect these. So that would be kind of a nice, quick way to get these to connect for you. These look like they might be fine, so we're good there. Let me hit undo on that. I'm just clicking and dragging these. And I'll do the same here just because I'm not as sure about the trim function. It seems to be a reverse logic than what I'm used to, so I prefer to just do it that way, which I understand a bit more clearly. You could now, if you want, hit delete on center lines. So what I've done here is just gone through and drafted a 6-foot path from a center line. The other thing you may want to do is you can actually go ahead and fillet the arc. Same thing here, you can do this from a radius. If you want a 6-foot radius, click and click, just to give you a sense of what these look like. So now I'm rounding these out, essentially, just making them a little smoother. Okay, hitting escape to get out of that. Now, the other thing you'll need to do is make sure that these are closed. So I'm just going to go up and hit the line segment. Make sure that side is closed. And I'll do the same here. And just hit escape to get out of that command. So once you're done with your subregion, just make sure you remember to hit the check mark. And you'll see if I hold shift and the scroll wheel, I now have this path, this implied path. What's really nice about this function, you'll see in a second, is as I regrade this site, the path will follow the topography. So that is very, very nice. Whereas this area, if I start to regrade the edges, it won't pull this other one up with it. And so you just need to be kind of sure about if you're using the split function, which I did here, where I know that my site context needs to meet the same spot. And the difference between something like that and making, say, an additional subdivided topo solid here, which in essence sits on the landscape. And so from here, what I can do with this is apply a different material. So I could hit these little dots. And we can look for a bunch of different stuff here. Let's just say this is cast in place concrete, or maybe it just comes in as concrete. See what we get. Here we go, concrete cast in place gray. That looks pretty good to us. It's not going to be lightweight or even precast. And so you can see that here now, different color, different material. In addition, you can see the hatching here on the side. The one thing that is a little funky about using the subdivide is if you want this to be, let's say just something like an inch off the ground. So this is very close to flush now, right? The issue really is you cannot have this become an indent. To have an indent, if you want to carve into this site, the way you're going to have to do that is through a void. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. But just know that this subdivide lends itself really well to pathways, and you can modify, once you have it selected, you can modify the height down to, let's say, an inch. And I think the default here was a foot. So that looked like this. So you'll have to decide, generally something like a pathway wouldn't be a foot off the ground like that. Could be conceivably, though, if you made this a different material and it was wood or something, it could be a wood path or something. But for what I'm imagining, 1 inch is fine. And there we go. Okay. So you'll notice if I want to work on this topography, I have to select it first, and you can see all these additional things come up for us. So modify sub-element, add points, these kinds of things. So we could modify sub-element, and these are all our additional points. And you can see that's relative to sea level, 34 feet above our 0 here. And so what we could do is start to change the elevation for this. So we could start to pull it up. And you can see here in real time how our path starts to conform to that topography still. We could add points as well if we need more resolution here. So you'll notice every time I'm clicking, the mesh, or what they're calling a topo solid, but looks a lot like a mesh. Maybe it is in its logic a mesh. But as you add these, there's more triangulation that's happening. And so you can start to move this up and down. And these are all going to be relative heights. So you can actually click and say like 33, hit enter, and see it'll kind of go up and down relative to whatever value. So this, if I wanted it to go down 10 feet from this value, I could just change that out to a 4 and it drops down for me. So pretty nice feature, kind of a real-time way to regrade your site and instant feedback in terms of the pathway you've selected, for instance. So hopefully you find that helpful. Once you're all good, you can hit escape to get out, and you'll notice it adds new contours, right? So this is a kind of regrading that we've done now. To that end, if you click on this and you go to edit type, you can edit your contour display. So right now you can see our primary and secondary contours. It's every 5 feet. There's a major contour and a minor contour for every foot. So you could have this be more like every 5 feet and every 10 feet. Okay. And you'll see the contours change. We can go back, right? Edit type, edit, and you could have this be every 1 foot and every 5 feet. Hit OK. And so in real time, it updates those for you, which is a super nice feature to have. So from here, the other thing that I'd like to show is just how you might cut out a piece of a topography. There's a number of different reasons why you may want to do this, but at the moment, I think this is somewhat good in terms of a workflow. You may want to distinguish, say, your context. You may want this to be something different, like a generic landform like this. So now you can see kind of context against, your site, the path you've designed. And so it could be just as well that you'd like to cut out a little portion of this. And so you can do that by going to Architecture, Component, Model in Place. I'll recommend going to the generic models, although you could also use something like a topo solid, just a little further down. Generic model will work fine for us. Hit OK. From here, you can do a void form, void extrusion. I recommend drafting still in plan, so I would just switch to plan view, just so you have full control. So you could do a box or kind of polygon, whatever you want, or you could just manually draft with the lines. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a little shape like this. Hit the check mark. And I'm going to scroll back. Now what you can see down here is it's only a foot in height, right? So here we could have this be considerably larger. We could say 100, apply. And so you can see this shape now starts to cut through the geometry. To finish this, you would use the cut geometry function. So you could do something like cut this and this. So now you have something cut out. We'll just hit it check mark to finish the model. So you could have something like a void, but you could also go back to massing in site. There's some other ways to draw, and just to showcase the software a little more, you could create from Sketch. And so you could actually also go back and use your line function and trace this. Like let's say you cut that out and you wanted to make a new shape in here. Hit the check mark. And you'll see you have this shape down here. It's a couple different things you can do. There's the height offset from level. So right now it's at 0, 0. So you could start to move this up if you wanted. Like even if I go here, modify sub-element, and I click on like some of these implied, so 33 feet, if I hit escape and I take this and I say 33 feet, it's going to move that up a little bit. Now, I would recommend, there's a couple of ways you can do this, but you could also just keep this certainly lower. Keep this lower, and then you could actually click modify sub-elements, and then you could just take this and drag it up. So there's a couple different ways to kind of work through things like this. And so you could also cancel on that. That's just an autosave prompt. But you could start to make some interesting landform moves like this. Now you'll notice this isn't perfect. If you wanted to line this up more, you could add a point. Hit escape just to get out of that. Grab that point there and snap it down. And so now you can see, it becomes a little bit more sort of inline and flush. So you would just add some additional points. Same thing here. You're just selecting this, modify sub-elements, and starting to move these things down or up or whatever, so snapping to it. So hopefully that's kind of clear. I won't go through and fix this up too much, but that would be the logic for something like that to create a kind of interesting landform. The other thing that I could show you just really quickly would be how to do an additional massing or something. So if we did want to let's take our building line work and we'll turn everything else off. So let's say we wanted to use this building line work to start to make massings from. We could take this, go File, Export Selected. We'll just say line work buildings. Since the other thing was really, I'd recommend here going to Polylines, hit OK. We'll go back to Revit. So you could go ahead and import CAD, building line work. And so you'll see here now we have these building lines. And so I'll just demo one. What you could do is go ahead and go Architecture, Component, Model in Place, and we'll go ahead and you could do a mass, or again, you could just do a generic model. I'm doing generic model. And in this case, I'm going to choose an extrusion. So we'll go with extrusion. And here you should be able to use this, which is a pick lines. So it creates lines based on existing, and you can see a bunch of things there. So what you can actually do is you can select these lines here. So you don't need to really redraft them. Now you can see these are slightly broken, which means it's going to be, we just want to make sure we have them all selected. So that looks pretty good to me. Let's give that, for extrusion height, what you may want to do is, we'll guess 60 feet or something for now. We'll hit the check. So that's the extrusion at 60 feet. If you remember, we can hit VG. So this won't work just yet because we have to cancel and we have to finish our model so we can finish. But now if you hit VG, imported categories, and we turn our additional guide on, you can see here our 3D model. So you can start to get a sense of how you may want to use this information to increase the size, or in this case, to actually move these since the objects aren't lined up. So you can start to move this. Again, we can go over into top view and we can just move this, snap it into place. So now it's in the actual footprint area. But in any case, I think you get the point. Control Shift. And this will give you a sense of how to adapt the height of this building to your guide as well. So depending on the parameters, and we'll go ahead and VG, import categories, and we'll turn off both of those functions. We'll go ahead and edit in place this model. And you can make this larger, so that's the other thing that you may want to do. If you notice that it was actually closer to 100 feet in height or something like that, and just finish that model again with the check mark. So we'll hit VG again, and let's just take a quick look. See, it's too high at the moment, but this is just to give you a sense of how you might do this workflow. So it looks like maybe it's around 70 or 75. Hard to guess. That's pretty good. And we'll just hit Finish Model, VG, and turn this off. This is kind of the closest, I would say, to our layer management in some ways. So hopefully that gives you a decent sense in terms of how to start to subdivide these topo solids. You can make additional ones. You can regrade, as we showed. You can cut something out and build a new topography within it. And you can also set pathways over top that update in real time. So those are the basic workflows in terms of Revit from a landscape architecture perspective. The one other thing I want to show you really quick is how to set up your sheets. So you'll recall we've set up our Gasworks Park design sheet, in this case, number 1. And you'll remember at the very beginning, I talked through these viewports and how they update in real time. So once you have a view you're happy with, like let's say I think that's a really great view for me. My site one, you're going to have to go back in and update your viewport graphics again here. So again, you may not want those 2 models. You may want some of this stuff, like say these drawing things, to actually be hidden. So you could use the sunglasses, hide element, and we can sort of go into this view. So the reason I'm doing this and trying to get some of my views here to start to look the same. So this is cropped to a specific view. Now, the reason this is cropped is it likely has an additional tie to our sheet set in terms of how it was set up. So you can see there's a bunch of different sectional options here for us: north, south, east, west, all these kinds of things. Now, I'm a little bit confused, quite honestly, about this. I don't really understand why this is locked or how to unlock it. It becomes difficult for me to really understand why these are tied. Now, I do get the sense that it has to do here with the extents, but the crop view is grayed out. What I'd recommend from here, you could go into your 3D views. This is going to be just a workaround for us, essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scrap all my elevation views since those are locked. But if you go here and you right click, duplicate view, you can actually take a view like this and go right. And this will get you a great elevation view. So I may even just right click, rename, and call this elevation. So now I have a view that is my elevation. If you don't want it to be the right one, you know, it could be the back view or even the left view, which might be kind of nice because you have the built form and the topography, something like that. And you'll notice in this view, there isn't that strange locked view box. Now you can have a cropping function here, crop view, crop region, and that's this here. But for whatever reason, so here it works fine, right? You can start to crop this a little more or a little less, or even left to right. Or you can check that off if you just want to keep it as is. So now you'll see I have an elevation that I've made in my 3D views. You have your 3D, right? And we're looking at these all across the top. So I have my site plan that I've prepared, my 3D view. Now we're going to scrap these architectural views. And we're going to keep our elevation one. So now you can see site view, 3D, elevation. The only other thing that we want to add is a section. And to cut a section, you have to do this in plan view. And you can see the section tool is up here, right beside where we hit the default 3D view. And so you can click section, click and pull. Now I'm cutting mine, let's say through, maybe this one will go through the building and through the largest mound. Now you can switch the orientation, like which way the section looks, which is kind of a nice feature, but what you can't really do is modify the angle of it. So, you know, in this case, if you had this section view and you're not happy with it, you can delete your section and then you have to draw it again. So if I wanted it to go, for instance, through here instead, so through my existing mound and through my new proposed area. In this case, a really cool feature is this right here, which is essentially like the kind of visibility here, the far clip offset. And so you can see that updates in real time. So, you know, do we want to be able to see the building in this section cut, or is it more about what's happening in the foreground? Or do we want to start to show the mound in the back? You can flip this by clicking these arrows. So that will take the view to the other side, back and forth. And that section should show up here for us. You can see there's a couple different section options. And same thing again, is you're going to have to just set up those settings. There are other ways to essentially import settings to all your viewports once you have them set, but that I think will be of more concern for you when you're in an architectural office. At this point, we're just looking to kind of set this up just how I have it here. So that's the view. These are the two section options. So you can see section 1, that was the first one that I had cut, and I'm just changing these view options, as well as, again, you could start to turn these off. Now, see, this one doesn't say much, so I think I'm going to go with section 2. That looks pretty good to me. And from there, you'll go to your design sheet. And these are essentially the 4 drawings that we're going to want. So this is a really nice feature. You can go to your site plan, view scale. Now, you may want to just try this at like 1 to 100. The reason I'm mentioning that is 1 to 20 would be really large. So if you take this, click down and pull over, click. Now you have a 1 to 100 site plan, super clean. So that's a nice feature. You can do the same with your 3D view. And, you know, here, if we know that's 1 to 100, maybe we want this one to be 1 to 200. Pull this, drag it over. And maybe that goes, you know, a little bit smaller to the side. 3D. And again, if you don't like the naming of that, right click, rename, isometric. There you go. So that updates in real time. You'll notice there's no scale here. The axes are generally NTS, not to scale. So that's looking pretty nice. I can go ahead and just, for the purposes of the demo, I'll show the elevation view as well. So we'll select this and go ahead and change this to, if we do 1 to 100, see how that looks. Yeah, so this can afford to be a little larger. Let's say if we wanted it to be along the bottom, 1 to 40 maybe may work pretty well for us. So let's click on this. 1 to 40. That'll be pretty much perfect. Yeah, very nice. And then the only other thing, yeah, you can kind of move these around too, if you want to move it up a little bit. And so from there, the only other one that we want is our section. So that was section 2. Go over here. Maybe we want our section to be around the same all along the bottom. Something like that. So that's 1 to 40. That's a little bit larger just because we're cutting across the other way. So you could actually chop this closer to 80, something like that. And there you have your section. If you have something like this, just know you can click on this and pull it just to drag that back over. And then same thing here. You can kind of move this down if you find it's a little bit too tight. So there you go, a series of drawings on your sheet. At this point, maybe it makes sense just really quickly for me to show you in a kind of applied way what I mean about, if I switch this to wireframe, or if I was to switch this to hidden line, and then we go back to our design sheet. Do you see how that sort of updates in real time? So that's likely the difference in terms of the default here between like architectural plans, because you do need to kind of remember that like, oh, okay, I go back to shaded if I want this stuff to look the same. So for instance, you could start to make a duplicate view, right? And so now you could call one of these, right click, rename, site drafting or working, and then just know that you actually want to be working from site drafting here instead of your site overall. And that's a good way to start to have your changes not sort of update in real time on your sheet set. So the only other thing would be just, remembering to save your file. So we can call this LR441 demo. Save. We can go ahead and test a print of this. File, print. We'll leave this on. Do not show this message again. Call that a test. So there you go. There's our sheet set.